Greetings and welcome to our presentation of the results from the November 2024 Community and Belonging Survey conducted by John Gula, Executive Director of the E. Ford Foundation, Steve Pilch from the University of Pennsylvania, and me, Kevin Graham of Lookout Management. Our objectives here are to first share an overview of the results, connect the dots among the variables, help to narrow your focus and add value to your conversations on community and belonging. We're going to show you this slide again at the end of the presentation. I share it with you now only so you have a picture of where we're hoping to take you. This is a broad constellation of the different variables we asked in the survey, showing you how they all connect to one another. If we're successful, when you see this again, you'll have a better understanding of what we're presenting. The survey is a repeat of the one we did in November 2022. Good news is we've had gains across almost every rating type measure in the survey, biggest gains for these five. Making choices that support my emotional well-being, my preparedness for handling stressful situations, agreement with the statement, there's at least one trusted adult I can talk to at school, my general satisfaction with the school, and number of hours of sleep. Kids are sleeping somewhat better now than they were 2 years ago. Here's a brief overview of what we did. We included 90 independent schools, 73 American, 17 Canadian. 21,468 students completed the form. It included 48 closed-ended measures and 3 open comment measures. We're only going to deal with the closed-ended measures today. Here, we're going to share a little bit of the drilling down into the detail crossed by these different variables in the survey. Along with this, there are another dozen narrated presentations on the website that go into greater detail on each of these topics. The first breakdown we're going to look at, drill into a little bit, is grade of enrollment. As you can see, respondents were split more or less evenly across the 4 high school grades. A typical finding, younger students are more likely to sleep more than 8 hours on school nights, while older students more likely to sleep less than 6. Students in the upper grades are more likely to feel that at least some of their teachers know who they are outside of the classroom. Older students also report greater self-appraised preparedness for adapting to face new challenges. And particularly for grade 12 students, greater preparedness for advocating for themselves. Self-appraised preparedness for approaching life with intellectual curiosity also rises with progression through the upper grades. Again, grade 12 students in particular report greater preparedness for assuming a leadership role. As you might hope, students report greater preparedness for conducting themselves with confidence as they progress through the grades. Student gender was roughly evenly split between those identifying as female and those as male, while 2% of students identified their gender as other than male or female, and another 1% indicated that they prefer not to identify their gender. While we have created a separate set of graphs comparing answers across all 4 groups, this presentation keys in only on differences between male and female respondents. As we've seen in other surveys, female respondents are more likely to identify as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community or to prefer not to answer this question. A common finding, female students report spending considerably more time daily on homework during the school week. They also report spending more time on social media compared to the male counterpart. Female students also report in greater proportion that they sleep less than 6 hours on school nights, with male students reporting in greater proportion that they attain more than 8 hours of sleep. You'll see a pattern here of female students giving lower ratings compared to male. Female students report lesser agreement with the statement, "I feel a strong sense of belonging at the school." The same is true for agreement with the statement, "I feel capable of handling the day-to-day academic workload." I feel emotionally safe while at school. I feel I have personal control over most of my successes and failures. And the school deals well with issues of bullying on campus. Female students also report lesser self-appraised preparedness for a number of skills, including conducting myself with confidence, handling stressful situations, and making choices that support my emotional well-being. Female students report having experienced discrimination at school based on gender identity at twice the rate of male students. We also broke apart the answers of students who identified as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, those who did not, and those who preferred not to answer this question. Those who prefer not to answer the question offer ratings in close approximation to those who said yes. This is consistent with our observations in other surveys of students. Expectedly, those who identify as a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community report in greater proportion that their gender is other than male or female, or that they prefer not to identify their gender. Those who explicitly did not identify as members of this community were also much more likely to identify as male, and that's a typical finding. For a number of slides, you'll see that those who identify as members of this community and those who preferred not to answer report lower ratings throughout much of the survey, starting here with lesser agreement with the statement, "I am comfortable being myself at school." The same is true for the statements, "I enjoy the social aspect of my dining experience at school," "I feel a strong sense of belonging at the school," "I feel emotionally safe while at school," "I feel respected and valued at school," and "the school deals well with issues of bullying on campus," with those who said yes reporting the lowest agreement. This might support the notion that the prefer not to answer group includes a contingent not yet openly declared as members of this community. Looking at the series of skill measures, we see that those who identified as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community and those who preferred not to answer this question also reported lesser self-appraised preparedness for advocating for themselves and for conducting themselves with confidence, coping with peer pressure, handling stressful situations, and making choices that support their emotional well-being. The only question in the survey that was different between American and Canadian students was the measure on identifying by racial, cultural classification. Starting with the American side, you'll see that the majority of students identify as white, while 13% identified as Asian. Keep those numbers in mind. Stressing that some of the group sizes here are quite small, including the number of Indigenous, International, and Pacific Islander students, we've included a red waterline for this series of slides to depict the overall averages for all American respondents. The high proportion of white students in the American sample frequently skews this average. Here we see that Asian and Middle Eastern students report spending more time on homework during the school week. I've marked the Indigenous and Pacific Islander categories here as a reminder of their very small cell sizes. Asian and Middle Eastern students report a greater proportion that they receive outside tutoring support. Looking to the green bars in this chart, we see that white students are the only group reporting below the average for those indicating that they get less than 6 hours of sleep on school nights. Similarly, we see that white students are the only group to report greater than the average overall satisfaction with the school experience. Asian, Black, and Pacific Islander students report statistically significant lower overall satisfaction with the student experience. White students reported the greatest level of agreement with the statement, "At least some of my teachers know who I am," outside of the classroom. White students also reported greater agreement with the statement, "I feel a strong sense of belonging at the school," while Black students reported significantly lesser agreement. The same is true for the statement, "I feel emotionally safe while at school." While white students reported greater agreement with the statement, "There's at least one trusted adult I can talk to at school," Asian students reported significantly lesser agreement. While Black, Indigenous, and Middle Eastern students report in significantly greater proportion that they have experienced discrimination at school, white students were the only group who fell below the overall average on this metric. Black students reported in much greater proportion that they experienced discrimination on the basis of race. When asked about discrimination on the basis of ethnic origin, Middle Eastern students report this experience in the highest proportion. The same is true for discrimination based on religion. Now we'll take a look at the racial cultural breakdown of the Canadian sample. You'll notice that the Asian students make up a much larger proportion and white students much smaller when compared to the American distribution. A typical finding among Canadian schools, East Asian students report in greater proportion that they receive outside tutoring support. In contrast, Black and Latin American students report in lesser proportion that they receive outside tutoring. Again, I've marked two categories here as represented by prohibitively small samples. Latin American students at Canadian schools give generally higher ratings of their school experience, while Black students report lesser satisfaction. Those who preferred not to provide their racial cultural identity report lesser overall satisfaction with their schools. Latin American and white students report greater agreement with the statement, "At least some of my teachers know who I am," outside of the classroom, while Black students reported much lesser agreement. Latin American students reported greater agreement with the statement, "I am comfortable being myself at school," while Black students and those who preferred not to respond report much lesser agreement. White students are more likely to report enthusiastic involvement in out-of-classroom activities, while Black students are less likely to do so. Latin American, white, and Southeast Asian students report a greater sense of belonging at school, while Black and multiracial students, and those who preferred not to respond, reported much lesser agreement. Both Latin American and East Asian students reported greater capability for handling the day-to-day academic workload, while Black and West Asian students reported considerably lesser agreement. Latin American students also reported the highest level of agreement with the statement, "I feel respected and valued at school," while Black students reported much lesser agreement. Black students reported in much greater proportion that they have been personally affected by experiences of discrimination at school, followed by the small sample of Indigenous students. Both Latin American and white students reported below the overall average on this account. As with the American sample, in fact, in higher proportion than for the American sample, Black students in Canada are much more likely to indicate that they have experienced discrimination at school on the basis of race. I share this slide as juxtaposed with the too regular claim by Canadians that we live in a welcoming salad bowl society, as opposed to the American melting pot. Perhaps it's not quite as palatable a salad as suggested. Similarly, we see a mixed bag of reported discrimination in Canada based on religion. All is apparently not so well under the surface. We're back now to looking at the compiled results, including both American and Canadian students. Looking to the number of hours spent daily on homework, we can see that the average is 2.0 hours, with the largest proportion of students spending between 1 and 2 hours each day. Here we see the split across grades. Green is grade 9, light blue is grade 12. As expected, older students spend more time on homework. As we saw in an earlier slide expressed in the other direction, male students are much more likely to spend less than 1 hour or between 1 and 2 hours on homework in comparison to the female counterpart. Another common finding, those who spend more time on homework, particularly those who spend more than 3 hours each day during the school week, report in greater proportion that they sleep less than 6 hours on school nights. As expected, those who spend more time on homework report that they feel lesser capable of handling the day-to-day academic workload. Those who spend more than 3 hours each day on homework report lesser feelings of emotional safety at school. Notably, those who spend less than 1 hour on homework each day report lesser enthusiastic involvement in out-of-classroom activities. This may reflect that those who spend less than 1 hour on homework are also lesser engaged with their school experience overall. We see the same effect here with those spending less than 1 hour on homework, reporting lesser agreement with the statement, "I am passionate about the study of at least one academic subject." Perhaps unsurprisingly, these students also report lesser self-appraised preparedness for setting high expectations for themselves. For some measures, we see that there is a saddle effect in comparisons by time spent on homework. Specifically, those who spend less than 1 hour and those who spend more than 3 hours report lesser overall satisfaction with the school experience. This may be because those who spend less time on homework are lesser engaged overall, while those who spend more time are overprogrammed and stressed in comparison to other groups. We see the same saddle effect when it comes to feeling a strong sense of belonging at the school and feeling encouraged in a love of learning. Now, let's take a look at the time that students report spending each day on social media, showing a weighted average of 2.3 hours. Just over a quarter of students report spending more than 3 hours a day on social media. Just 5% say they do not use social media. With the exception of those who do not use social media, increasing time spent on social media is associated with lesser enthusiastic involvement in out-of-classroom activities. I wonder if this reflects a concerning dual lack of engagement for that group on the far left of this screen. Those who spend less time on social media also report greater agreement with the statement, "I am passionate about the study of at least one academic subject." Look at the drop-off for those spending more than 5 hours every day on social media. Not a pretty picture. When it comes to enjoying the social aspects of their dining experience at school, we see the saddle effect once again. Those who spend more than 2 hours on social media daily report progressively lesser sense of belonging at school. Greater time on social media is also associated with a lesser sense of capability in handling the day-to-day academic workload. Bang! Those who spend more than 5 hours daily on social media feel meaningfully lower emotional safety while at school. They also feel lesser encouraged to express their opinion, and lesser agreement with the statement, "I feel respected and valued at school." While there is some degree of linearity here, those who spend more than 5 hours on social media on a daily basis report the lowest agreement with the statement, "The school encourages a love of learning in me." This group also reports considerably lesser agreement with, "There is at least one trusted adult I can talk to at school." I feel compelled to interpret these drop-offs as a cry for help. Starting at more than 2 hours spent daily on social media, students report progressively lesser self-appraised preparedness for adapting to face new challenges. Those who spend more than 5 hours daily on social media also report lesser preparedness in advocating for themselves, and also lesser self-appraised preparedness for approaching life with intellectual curiosity. Here you'll see a bit of a skewed saddle effect, suggesting perhaps a happy middle for preparedness in assuming a leadership role and the time spent daily on social media. With the exception of those who do not use social media at all, more time spent on social media is associated with lesser self-appraised preparedness for conducting oneself with confidence, and also coping with peer pressure and handling stressful situations, making choices that support one's emotional well-being, organizing time effectively, setting high expectations for oneself, thinking creatively, thinking critically, and finally, those who do not use social media and those who do so more than 5 hours daily report lesser preparedness for working cooperatively in a group. My interpretation of this set of slides is that above 2 hours per day, increasing time spent on social media goes downhill for students in many other measures. At the same time, much as it pains me to say so, there's also a suggestion here that at least some time on social media may be a good thing. The majority of students report sleeping between 6 and 8 hours on school nights, while only 14% attain more than 8 hours. A whopping 17% of students report on average that they sleep less than 6 hours on school nights. And you're about to see strong associations with this shortfall, significant to say the least. As we saw earlier from the reverse perspective, those who get more sleep are more likely to identify as male. Those who sleep less are also more likely to spend more time on homework and on social media. Those who sleep less than 6 hours on school nights report much lesser overall satisfaction with the school experience. They also report lesser comfort in being themselves at school and a lesser sense of belonging at school. Those who sleep less feel lesser capable of handling the workload and also lesser emotional safety, lesser feeling of control over their successes and failures, lesser sense of feeling respected and valued at school, lesser perceived value in being a member of the school community, lesser feeling of being supported at school, lesser agreement that the school deals well with bullying on campus, and lesser encouraged in a love of learning. Students who get more sleep on school nights report greater self-appraised preparedness for a number of skills, starting with handling stressful situations. They also feel better prepared for making choices that support their emotional well-being. And of course, organizing time effectively. Lack of sleep is also meaningfully associated with reports of being affected by experiences of discrimination at school. I should note here that this doesn't tell us the direction of cause and effect. Do they report discrimination more because they don't sleep, or is it the other way around? Looking now to distinctions crossed by experiences of discrimination at school, we see that 21% of respondents reported that they have been personally affected by discrimination. When we break apart the specific types of discrimination experienced at school, we see numerous distinctions. For this set of graphs, the red line indicates the average rating of students who did not report having experienced discrimination at school. Here, we see that those who have experienced discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation expectedly report in much greater proportion that they identify as a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community. It's important to note that all students who have experienced discrimination of any kind report in greater proportion that they identify as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. Similarly, all students who have experienced discrimination reported in greater proportion that they sleep less than 6 hours on school nights, compared to 14.4% of those who have not experienced discrimination at school. In particular, those who report having experienced discrimination because of their socioeconomic status report in higher proportion that they sleep less than 6 hours, followed closely by experiences of discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Those who've experienced discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation report greater agreement with the statement, "At least some of my teachers know who I am outside of the classroom." This is still slightly below the average of those who have not experienced discrimination at school. This is interesting when juxtaposed with the next slide on being comfortable as themselves at school. Note the glaring differences between those who have experienced any kind of discrimination and the group who have not experienced discrimination at school. A related measure, we similarly see that those who have experienced discrimination based on gender identity, sexual orientation, learning differences, or socioeconomic status report lesser agreement with the statement, "I enjoy the social aspect of my dining experience at school." Unsurprisingly, all students who have experienced discrimination report lesser sense of belonging at school, most pointedly for those who have experienced discrimination on the basis of gender identity, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. Students who report any kind of discrimination at school feel, on average, lesser capable of handling the day-to-day academic workload. Another unsurprising distinction: students who have experienced discrimination at school report much lesser feelings of emotional safety. Similarly, those who have experienced discrimination of any kind feel lesser encouraged to express their opinion. Those who have experienced discrimination were also less likely to feel that they have agency over their own successes and failures. Students who have experienced discrimination also reported lesser feelings of being respected and valued at school. The same is true for feeling meaningful, positive value in being a member of the school community. Feeling treated as an individual. Note the low score for those experiencing discrimination based on socioeconomic status. And again, those who have experienced discrimination at school based on socioeconomic status feel lesser supported as they strive to meet their potential. The same is true for the measure, "I have at least one close friend at school," and feeling prepared to engage constructively with people holding different perspectives. Students who have experienced discrimination report meaningfully lesser agreement with the statement, "The school deals well with issues of bullying on campus," particularly if they have been discriminated against on the basis of gender identity, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status. Incidence of experiencing discrimination at school is also significantly associated with a lesser feeling that their schools encourage a love of learning. These students also report lesser agreement with the statement, "There is at least one trusted adult I can talk to at school," especially so if they have experienced discrimination on the basis of socioeconomic status. Students who have experienced discrimination at school also report lesser self-appraised preparedness for many skill measures, including adapting to face new challenges, conducting themselves with confidence, coping with peer pressure, and handling stressful situations. With all groups well below the average of those who have not experienced discrimination, those who report having experienced discrimination at school based on gender identity or sexual orientation report the lowest level of preparedness for making choices that support their emotional well-being. Finally, Canadian students are more likely to report having been discriminated against based on their race or ethnic origin compared to their American counterparts. Canadian students are also somewhat more likely to report having experienced discrimination based on socioeconomic status. In contrast, American students are more likely to report having experienced discrimination at school based on politics. Okay, bear with me on this one. This is a bit of a busy slide, but there are a few things I'd like to share with you. For reported overall satisfaction with the school experience, 20,717 participants answered the question. 70.5% scored the measure at 4 or 5 on the 5-point scale. For those who care, the standard deviation for this distribution is 0.89. The weighted average at 3.8 is up slightly from 3.7 in 2022. To the upper right, you'll see a summary of descriptive statistics comparing across the 90 participating schools. The average across schools is 3.8. The highest average for a school was 4.8 and the lowest 3.2. We've crossed general satisfaction, which was question B in the survey, on the x-axis with every other measure in the survey. There's lots we could talk about, but I'll share just 5 of these distinctions with you today. Here we see that those reporting greater satisfaction overall report spending less time on social media, and don't lose sight of that fact. A universal finding across the hundreds of student surveys I've conducted, greater overall satisfaction is highly correlated with hours of sleep. No surprise there. Confirming our original hypothesis in the creation of this project, the Community and Belonging Survey, we see almost a perfect slope of 1 here. Greater satisfied respondents report greater agreement with the statement, "I feel a strong sense of belonging at the school." And they also agree more with the statement, "I feel respected and valued at school." Agreement with this touches every other measure in the survey, and meaningfully so. Toward the end of the presentation, you'll see exactly what I mean. General satisfaction is also closely tied to agreement with the statement, "The school encourages a love of learning in me." Digging in a little bit here, I'm going to share a few slides that show just how well a number of key measures correlate with other measures in the survey. Don't focus so much here on the numbers. You can review those on the website at any time. Catch the themes. Picking up on the general satisfaction slides we just saw, we pulled correlation coefficients for general satisfaction with 35 other measures in the survey. The top 5 ranks went to these measures. You're about to see how some of these correlates bubble to the top of the ranking over and over and over. In this case, 30 other measures ranked below these 5 in terms of correlation with the general satisfaction measure. This does not mean that they are unimportant, they're just lesser correlated. Next, let's focus on engagement in out-of-classroom activities, what I call UCA. At 4.0, this measure has also increased slightly since 2022. To the lower right, you see the plus-minus ratio. What this means is that the number of respondents who agree or strongly agree with that statement outnumber those who disagree or strongly disagree by a ratio of 8.9 to 1. To the upper right, if your school was the one that attained the 4.7 score here, put a banner on the wall. I find it intriguing and encouraging that when we correlate this UCA measure across 35 other measures in the survey, the top 2 ranks center on deriving value and bringing value. This slide alone should inform many important conversations with students and parents alike, and of course, with faculty and staff. Unchanged from 2022, students rated their sense of belonging at 3.7 with a plus-minus ratio of 4.9. This chart captures at a glance how strongly correlated sense of belonging is with many other measures in the survey. As we work our way through this set of slides, you should see a constellation coming into focus. Students' sense of emotional safety is up slightly from the 2022 survey, with an average score of 3.8. To the upper right, average scores across participating schools vary widely. And of course, emotional safety is highly correlated with the same mix of other survey measures. This is a new measure in the survey, one of agency. The plus-minus ratio came in at 10.5 to 1. School scores ranged between 3.4 and 4.5, but the standard deviation is pretty tight. This means that the high and low scores are outliers. I found it fascinating that the only other measure in the survey with a correlation coefficient for the agency measure above 0.5 was the feeling of being supported at school. Suggested we're interconnected and interdependent. All right, here's the respected and valued measure, so important to everything else. At 3.8, it's unchanged from 2022 with a plus-minus ratio of 7.8 and school scores varying widely. And here's how that measure correlates with other measures in the survey. Look at the numbers to the right. Every conversation you have about the student experience at your schools needs always to have this measure in the mix. Unchanged from 2022, ratings of gaining value from being a member of the community come in at 3.8. I'll bet you'd love to have the 4.9 score in the box to the upper right of this slide. And here's what correlates most highly with meaningful positive value from being a member of the school community. I'm sure I don't have to point out what tops the list. When you boil it all down, we're left with 16 key areas that we take away for follow-on conversation. This is a mix of attitudinal measures with self-appraised preparedness measures. We've shared a lot of data with you today and a lot of numbers. I've suggested the notion of looking at it all as a constellation. Well, we've actually done just that. And elsewhere on the website, you'll find a more detailed presentation discussing a dozen slides on these constellations stemming from our findings. As a bit of a teaser, though, we thought it worthwhile to share a small selection of these visuals with you today. This is a correlation network map showing the degrees of connection among all 20 attitudinal agreement measures in the survey. The proximity of nodes to one another and the thickness of lines are indicators of the intensity of these connections. Those appearing in the center of this graphic display the strongest associations with each other. We've highlighted these key measures on the left with red stars, including comfort being oneself, feeling well supported, emotional safety, gaining value from being a member of the community, feeling treated as an individual, and of course, sense of belonging and feeling respected and valued. This last one, C11, is at the core of that grouping. Just for fun, I'm sharing the map of all attitudinal measures along with the 15 self-appraised preparedness measures. This reveals the visual connections across all 35 measures, which of course are best studied in detail in a different format. Just the same, the visual may add value for you. Finally, we've merged these 35 measures with the key breakdown measures we've already discussed. This visual portrayal underscores the select set of recommendations we're about to make. The color of the lines is important here. Green lines indicate a positive correlation, red lines indicate a negative correlation. From this, you can see the universal positive correlations with not having been affected by experiences of discrimination at school. You can also see the universally positive associations with hours of sleep. Hours spent on homework consistently show negative correlation to other measures, and time spent on social media for every single measure in the survey comes up negative. As I say, these are just 3 of a dozen such maps you'll find in a more detailed narrated presentation on the website. The task before us then is to better understand how this constellation works and how that understanding can contribute to ongoing efforts to improve student experience. Our recommendations. Schools should broadly share an overview of this survey's results within their communities. These results should inform and advance many important conversations. Advance conversation with students, parents, and teachers on the topic of attaining adequate sleep. Associations with inadequate sleep are both wide-sweeping and profoundly negative. Engage with students and families in an effort to reduce time spent on social media. From all measures in this survey, there are no positive associations with greater time spent on social media, only negative. Advance conversation on the role of discrimination experiences as they relate to, but not only to, sense of belonging, emotional safety, and ratings of success in response to bullying. Closely review the many lower ratings coming from those who identify as members of the LGBTQ2S+ community, as well as from those who preferred not to answer this question. And finally, intentionally create opportunity for students to become better decision makers. Making choices that lead to emotional well-being and time management skills should be prominent in this effort. Students who rate themselves well prepared on these fronts offer consistently stronger ratings throughout the entire survey. If you have any questions about this project or our findings from the survey, please feel free to contact any of us by email. Have a wonderful day.